Did you notice that there is something missing in our passage from Mark today? There are almost 20 verses that are taken out of our passage, and those 20 missing verses contain the story of the feeding of the 5,000 and Jesus walking on water. Why are they left out? Now, many of you know, I know that many of you are involved in the study of the Gospel of Mark this summer, and you know that he has this sandwich technique of telling a story where he frames a central episode with a seemingly, perhaps unrelated, other story. And the idea, we think, is that by putting the stories together in this way, the framing story helps illuminate the central episode in new and different ways. And so if we had the whole passage today, we would be reading the miracles of the feeding and the walking on water in light of these two crowd teaching healing descriptions that we get. Because if the miracles were read, we would have no choice but to focus on them. But subtract the miracles, and we're instead invited to see these descriptions of the Jesus movement as the central point. So, what then do we see? Well, we start, and we have in the sort of background, we've got the very opening, the disciples are coming to Jesus to sort of share what they've done. If you remember, they've recently been sent out to proclaim the gospel, sent out to the villages, and they've asked to be very vulnerable and carry nothing with them. They have been told to accept hospitality, embrace contingency, and leave places where they're not welcome. And so here we see them coming back to Jesus, and they're clearly exhausted from all their work, but probably excited also to tell him everything that's happened. And Jesus suggests that they rest. It's not clear in the text if they actually get a rest, but it is clear that this movement is growing. This is surely the summertime of Jesus' ministry, where the leaves unfurl from the stem and the vines begin to put forth their fruits. The message is expanding. People are hearing them, listening to them, being moved by them. In the first paragraph, we see that people are hungry for Jesus' teaching. They're so hungry that they pursue him with great energy, running around a whole lake to get there before he does. And Jesus has compassion for them and teaches them. In the very next paragraph, it's healing that everyone is desperate for, that the crowd is desperate for. And they come from far and wide to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. But what I notice in these two is that there is no central episode. Rather, we get this kind of panoramic landscape shot. Jesus, disciples, eager crowd, teaching and healing, water and city and rural farm, activity and rest all in one. Now, many of you know that I am a cook. I take serious delight in food and eating, and I've been raised in the tradition of seasonal eating and find that food is a primary way that I both take note of and respond to the seasons of the year. Now, in spring, I notice, we are presented with clarity in this regard. Our senses sharpened by winter deprivation. The early weeks of the farmer's market are very articulate. You get radishes and early lettuce, and you rejoice. And then you get asparagus and eat it every other night for 2 weeks. And then maybe rhubarb, which you also cook as many ways as you can think of. And then sugar snap peas, and then strawberries. And each new treasure comes in at a moment, distinct, observable, and wonderful. And then summer hits, and you can no longer contain the progression of each new thing. Instead, there is dazzling profusion. 5 kinds of lettuce, 3 kinds of kale, 2 colors of Swiss chard, 3 kinds of beets, 5 kinds of young onions, boxes upon boxes of raspberries, fragrant basil, and edible orange nasturtiums, the first sun-gold cherry tomatoes. I have a motto that I've cut up and hung in my office, and it reads, "Everything all at once." Its meaning is, I think, clearest in these summer months, where the bounty of the created world is everywhere you turn. The sparkle on the Charles River, the green-blue rise of the waves at Horseneck Beach, the trout jumping to the surface of the tree-ringed Walden Pond. Plus all those fruits and vegetables I just mentioned, plus all the beautiful variations in people and their summer attire, plus all the wildflowers. If I spoke in detail for hours, don't worry, I won't, I wouldn't even scratch the surface of what could be observed here just in this one city, in this one week, in this one month. So everything all at once, for me, is a way to claim that God's grandeur is not limited to my limits of perception or appreciation. What is overwhelming to me is, in fact, merely the fringe of God's garment. This is, after all, the God who says, "I am everything. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end." And so it is that the cosmic unity, which is God, is underneath, behind, and enabling my limited field of vision. So I think somehow that especially in summer, we're invited to step back and try and let the eyes and heart and soul and mind take in all of the fullness of it, everything all at once. However, when I start thinking too much about everything all at once, I experience two things. First, I have the stirring of joy, the expansive sense of possibility in reality. But quickly, I'm also aware that I can't bear it all. I can't see it all. I can't remember it all. I can't eat it all, even if I try. And that stirs for me a sense of sorrow, of loss, of incompleteness. And so there, I think, is the human condition. In a word, we humans are infinite beings of light, children of the very Creator, made for everything all at once. And yet, we humans are also finite, limited, circumscribed by flimsy bodies of pain and filth and violence and failure. And somehow, the more that I seek the everything, the more aware I am of the constraint of this mortal flesh. So how then does Jesus' proclamation of peace that Paul describes, his breaking down the dividing wall between us, his reconciliation of us with the everything all at once, in his own flimsy body, actually help us? Well, let's go back to the text. The gospel gives us this mashup of teaching and preaching so that we begin to see that the teaching and the healing are not divided, but related. The same goes, I think, for places and people in this story. The teacher, the disciple, the needy crowd are not divided so much as related. The city, the town, the farm, not divided, but related. So that the gift of peace in this story is not found in either highlighting or obliterating the differences, but by zooming far enough out from it to see that the unity is bigger than the differences, that the relatedness of things is greater than their fractures, that the unity of God's world is more real than our limited perception allows. Now you might ask, will this hold up if we push it a bit? Fine, you might say, fruits and vegetables and sailboats in the harbor may evoke a pleasant sense of the goodness of the world, but what of beheadings and church burnings and stomach cancer? Surely those atrocities can't be understood to be contained in God's embrace. And yet, this may be why Paul, and many Christians after him, are so insistent on the power of the cross to bring about this peace. Because Jesus on the cross tells us all now and forever that in fact the everything is contained in God, that even in the most heinous moments of earthly distress, that God is there and God is not destroyed by the darkness. Truly, truly, we need not fear any awfulness that will come to us, because one went there before us, goes there with us now, and carries us through to the other side. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. The same God leadeth me beside still waters and green pastures, the Alpha and the Omega, everything all at once. Jesus offers us peace by redeeming the whole human narrative, by encompassing beauty and compassion and healing and traveling, and also dying and being humiliated, betrayed, and surrounded by hate and violence, by being everything all at once in his very body and blood. And we are commissioned by that same Jesus to tell this story as many ways as we can. We are commissioned to teach and heal and build in honor of this truth. We don't read the miracle stories today because today is less about how magical and amazing Jesus is and more about the landscape of peace which we are offered when we seek God and when we serve God. Paul reminds us that the power of Jesus is found in weakness. His suffering brings him close to us in our suffering. His peace is not found in overcoming all evil, but knowing that God is greater than our evil. Jesus' compassion and his anchoredness in God, which are related, are his greatest gifts, and gifts to which we can truly aspire. Can we receive this gift? Let's memorize and say to ourselves, perhaps over and over, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen.